Next 4 modules, we're really going to be focused on teaching and how you go about delivering your content. So I wanted to start with this slide here. So there are 5 main groups of instructional skills or instructional strategies that you can use to deliver your content. Probably the one that you're most familiar with is that one at the top, and that's direct instruction. So it involves things like lectures, workbooks, movies, TV, having an invited speaker. I will tell you, direct instruction has a time and a place, and it is important. It's not less important than any of the other strategies that you see up here. However, I want you to stop for a minute. I want you to think, how many lectures do you remember as a student? Probably not a lot. So though direct instruction is important, and yes, there's a time and place for it, I would really encourage you as a future teacher to start exploring some other avenues of instructions, some methods that your students that are actually going to stick with them throughout their time as a student. So another method, rather than direct instruction, is indirect instruction. This may be giving your students a case study or some way to discover their learning. Maybe it's a problem. You give them a problem, you give them the tools, and you act more as a facilitator of learning. There's experiential learning, so this could be anything from like a science experiment to a field trip to a field observation, or games are a great way of instructing students. You see individual study over there. This is where the teacher's more or less hands off. This could be like an essay or a report. You could also do like independent contracts with students where they're learning on their own. We'll actually talk about this a lot when we talk about diverse learners. So if you have those intellectually gifted students, how are you going to challenge them? And maybe doing a learning contract may be a way of doing that. And then you have interactive instruction. We'll be talking about interactive instruction a lot when we talk about active learning. So this is getting your students to talk with one another. Maybe it's a debate, maybe it's a brainstorming session, maybe it's role playing. This is a great way to really get your students thinking critically about the content. So let's delve a little bit more into each one of these categories. As I mentioned, there's definitely a time and place for direct instruction. This is very teacher directed. It's used for delivering information. So we're very used to that when we think about things like lectures or drill and skill. It could again be like watching a video, that type of thing. If you have a new concept that's brand new to students, a lot of times teachers will refer to direct instruction. Again, just like I said a while ago though, you don't want to use that every single time. You definitely want to use different methods. Here's one of the main reasons why. If you don't remember anything else from this video, remember this. Our students have very little attention spans. Even us as adults have very little attention spans. You can see down there at the bottom, if you're using direct instruction or lecture, even an adult, 15 to 18 minutes. You notice my videos usually don't go over 15 minutes because I know our attention span. I know how long you can sit here and listen to me talk. For your smaller ones, 5 to 8 minutes. And then you can see how it gradually goes up here. But 15 minutes is about max in terms of you lecturing. If you want your students to retain that information, they've got to then do something with it. So if you are using direct instruction, I would challenge you to lecture 15 minutes, especially if you're older ones, or 5 to 8 minutes if it's smaller ones, and then activity has to come next. Indirect instruction, again, that's where, the teacher's kind of taking a hands-off approach. It's very student-centered. It could be case studies or reflective discussion. I had a graduate school professor who would walk into class, write a problem on the board, and then wipe her hands of the whole thing. She'd provide us the tools, the resources. We worked together in groups to figure out the answer, but she would not give you the answer. I will tell you, it drove me insane as a student. However, I probably learned the most from that class than I have any other class I've ever taken. Interactive instruction, again, very student-centered. This allows for a lot of interaction between not only student to student, but interaction between teacher to student, debates, role-playing. We're going to talk about jigsaws, which are an awesome strategy, interviewing, discussion. It really relies heavily on sharing with peers. Remember what you learned from Vygotsky. Children tend to learn a lot from each other and having discussions with one another. Experiential instruction, again, very student-centered, very activity-oriented. So maybe they go on a field trip, maybe they conduct an experiment, maybe they play a game, and then they pause and they reflect on that. It's more about the process than it is the end result. Individual study, again, we'll talk about this a lot when we talk about diverse learners, but it's providing that opportunity for that learner to kind of create their own path. So this could be through their own essay, through their own report, maybe they have some kind of project that they've done individually. Also, I mentioned a while ago, learning contracts, especially if you have that student who's just, let me go to the next topic. So now that we've gone over all those different instructional strategies, let's talk about basically what a layout of a lesson plan is going to look like when you're mapping out your instruction. I would encourage you to plan for some kind of bell ringer activity. A lot of teachers call this either a bell ringer. I called it a warm-up in my class. Students know what to expect when they come in, like I'm immediately going to start on my bell ringer. This gets them into the mindset of learning. It could be you can use it to review a topic from the previous day, or it could maybe get students to start thinking about the topic from the next day. The see, think, wonder that we've done in this class, maybe you put an image on the board and you have students see, think, and wonder about what they're going to be learning that day. Not only that, but I'll be honest, as a teacher, when they first come in, you are trying to organize papers, you're trying to get students settled, you're trying to take attendance, you're trying to collect homework. Bell ringer is a really great way to get them focused while you're doing all those procedural things that you need to do. After you do your bell ringer, typically we have some kind of opener, and then we also want to talk about the end, how you want to have a closure. The opener is what gets a student hooked. Like, how are we going to get them to buy into what they are about to learn? So some fun ways are listed over there on the right, and I'm going to provide you a lot of other ways too, but maybe you show them a video clip, or maybe you show them a picture, or maybe you tell them a story, or maybe you present some type of real world problem that you could solve from their learning that they're going to learn for today. And then the closure at the end is really a chance for you as the teacher to check in and make sure, did they actually learn what I wanted them to learn today? Maybe it's an exit ticket. Maybe it's a thumbs up, thumbs down. It's really that kind of conclusion for you to decide, okay, do I need to spend more time on this tomorrow, or can we move on? I do want to mention questioning techniques, especially if you're using a lot of direct instruction. You want to make sure there's some interaction between you and the student. So how do you pose questions to your student when you're doing a group instruction? I would encourage you to include questions such as, what do you think it could be? Or what do you think the answer might be? Really stop and get your students to think. And that goes into the next point. Don't let wait time scare you. You're going to pose a question, they're going to look out, and they're just going to be looking right back at you. This happens to me all the time, even when I teach adults now. Wait for an answer. Don't give the answer, wait for it. Students hate silence just as much as you do. So if you sit there and you wait for the answer, they're going to get tired of waiting, and somebody's going to provide one. Now, if a student gets an answer right or wrong, I would encourage you, keep going to the next person. Let's get feedback from as many students as possible before we come together and decide on a correct answer. Now, if a student does get a question wrong, we don't want to shoot them down. We don't want to say, oh, that's wrong, and move on to the next person. We want to try to build upon that and be like, oh, I think you're on to something here. Let's hear from a few others and let's see if we can come to a conclusion. Or maybe try to draw out the correct answer from them without just shooting them down. Now, some teachers are big on cold calling students, especially if they're ones that never participate in class. Now, I will say, if you are going to cold call students, give them some options, especially if they're like completely lost. Maybe you give students like options to opt out, maybe 1 or 2 times. Don't give them the chance to opt out every single time. Or you can give them an opportunity to maybe phone a friend in class to say, hey, like, I don't know the answer, but I'm thinking my friend blank might know the answer. This is just a chart of some different question stems to get you to ask meaningful questions, to get students to think critically, to use their imagination, to predict what the answer might be, or what's the probability of this happening, or what's the probability of this being correct. So I'd encourage you to maybe search out this question matrix grid. You can take a screenshot of it here, and that's really going to help you in terms of guiding your questions. With that being said, let's take a look at the assignments that you have to do this week. Stage 3, you're going to be filling out this worksheet here. So what I'm asking you to do is take that same standard that you've been working with when you developed your assessment, when you wrote your big ideas, your understandings, and now let's come up with the learning plan. What's that lesson going to look like? What's my bell ringer going to be? It's important for you also to put how much time do you anticipate spending on it. Now, I know you don't know right now how much time you're going to have in class, but let's just assume that it's between an hour and a half. How are you going to fill up an hour to an hour and a half? So what's your bell ringer going to be? What's your lesson opener going to be? Now, I want to know at least 2 activities that you're going to be doing. So if you're going to be having a classroom discussion, tell me what type of questions that you're going to be asking. Are you going to have a hands-on activity? Tell me what it's going to look like. If you're going to do a worksheet in class, tell me what the worksheet's going to look like. And then tell me how much time, again, that your student's going to spend on it, and then what materials are going to be needed. I want at least 2, but feel free to do more than 2. I hope you actually use this lesson plan in the future. And then finally, what's your closer going to be? And again, I've given you a lot of ideas for all of these things this week, so make sure you go back to that book that I provided. And then how much time are you going to spend on that closing activity? So I will show you, I have provided you an example that you can feel free to look at to get some ideas on what I'm looking for. So using that same objective that I've been using to give you examples, here's one on a lesson involving the circumference of circles. So I've described for you what type of bell ringer, what type of opener. These are the activities that I would have students do, and be very specific. Like, what is this going to look like? Especially for a beginning teacher, it is better for your lesson plans to be more detailed than not. If you just write down, like, you know what, I'm going to teach circumference of circles, and you just wing it, I promise you it's not going to go well. And I promise you, you're going to be 10 minutes into class thinking to yourself, well, I'm out of material. It's better to have too much than to have too little. So I've given this activity what materials I need. I've got an activity where we read a book about circumference and what materials I need. And then the students at the end have a real world practice activity that they're going to do. And then finally, what type of closer would I give at the end? Spending the next 4 modules all on instructional strategies, so there is certainly more to come.